Hello, and welcome to the three most dangerous myths the grieving believe that keep them broken, in despair, and wondering if they will ever be happy again. Sometimes it can take a few minutes for people to get connected here on the webinar platform. I appreciate you joining in on time. We're going to take a minute or so before we get started to ensure we have everyone on who wants to be here. Please note that this webinar is expected to be about 45 minutes to an hour in duration. There will be time at the end for a little Q&A, so you have two options. You can jot down any questions or comments you have as we go forward and ask me them at that time, or you can post the questions in the chat box and I will answer them at the end. I would like to note that this is going to be a recorded session. However, I have disabled the viewing of the chat function for the video, which means that you can feel free to ask questions as you go and they're not going to end up on the video segment. For those of you who are not watching live but are catching the replay, thank you for checking in. There will be a few things that you won't be able to see, but I'll kind of do my best to make sure you know what's going on. Okay, let's get started on the three most dangerous myths the grieving believe that keep them broken, in despair, and wondering if they will ever be happy again. My name is Michelle Nyong'o, and I will be the facilitator of the webinar presentation. I am super excited to offer live webinars to ensure distance and location are not a barrier to those wishing to get high-quality training, education, or counseling in the comfort of your own home. I'm the owner and counselor at Stride Wellness. As you will see, for those who are on the live webinar, there should be a little survey box popping up asking you, how many types of grief do you think there are? Please note, nobody will see your answers, but this will give me an overall idea of what you think is the case. The options are 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 40 plus, or you can put, I have no idea. So go ahead, put those in. If you're watching replay, hold that little nugget in your head and we'll talk about this a few slides down the road. I am excited to be here today, sharing with you a topic I feel not only passionate about, but called to talk about. There are many reasons for this, and I will touch on some of them here today. So what brings us together? I'm here partially because I've experienced grief, loss, a time of mourning, and bereavement. We all go through seasons in life where we experience loss of some kind. You may have chosen to be here because you've either walked this path as well, or you continue to journey through grief or loss in its most intense form. Or maybe you are here for a totally different reason. Maybe you're inquisitive and want to know more about the topic for a friend, family member, or for educational reasons. Perhaps you have some things going on for you physically, mentally, or emotionally, and you're wondering if it relates to a loss you've experienced. Whatever the reason, we are here together today to delve into this topic, and I'm thankful you have chosen to join me. Welcome. I promise to make it worth your while. For all of you who are watching this as their first webinar, congrats. Yay for using technology. And for all of you regular webinar users, I'm happy that you're joining with me today. Now is the time to put away all of your additional technological devices and close out those extra tabs so you can settle in and devote the next half hour to yourself free of distraction. Shutting everything down in the background will ensure there is no buffering of the webinar delivery platform. If, for whatever reason, you are not able to stick around until the end, or if you want to revisit the webinar at a later time and date, it will stay on my website until November 7th at midnight. For all of you who stay until the end of the live presentation, I will provide you with a gift as a thank you for sharing your time with me. Partly because I want to know who likes free things, and partly because I want to ensure everyone knows how to use the chat function properly. Type I do in the chat box if you like free stuff, or type no thanks if you don't. Yes, I'm seeing lots of I-dos. Excellent. I will get them to you shortly after this webinar finishes. Let me reintroduce myself. For anyone that may be joining in now, again, my name is Michelle Nyong'o. I am the wife to my husband Ruben and the mother to 3 children. We live a happy and full life in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada, where our family of 5 keeps active by being involved in a variety of sports and activities. I would love to see where everyone is joining in from, so please type it in the chat box. Okay, so I'm from Kamloops, and I see we have another couple Kamloops people, a Coquitlam, a White Rock. Awesome. All Canadians on here today. Thanks so much for joining in. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a counselor at Stride Wellness. I opened my own business and have a desire to help those going through the process of grief and loss. And this really came about because I took my master's degree in education counseling at Thompson Rivers University following the death of my son. And I was drawn to the field and knew my passion was for those who were hurting following a death or a loss. Life hasn't always been roses, rainbows, and unicorns for us, though. In fact, we've experienced extreme times of tragedy. We have suffered immeasurable loss. I personally lived in the depths of grief. You see, our family of 5 was actually a family of 6, as I just alluded to. Our youngest child, David, was born extremely premature, and although he made huge strides and we planned for his eventual discharge, he succumbed to a side effect of prematurity and died on my 31st birthday at only 69 days old. My world crumbled. I broke. Actually, I shattered. Anyone who knows me knows that being a mom is part of what defines me, and with the loss of my son, just felt like I wasn't the mom I was supposed to be. I was so angry. I questioned my faith and why did this have to happen? We are good people and great parents. We have a loving family and we didn't deserve this. How can you go on with life after something like this? How can I be a good parent to the children I have remaining? There was so much fear, anger, heartache, and numbness during that time. I was overwhelmed and seemingly hopeless. Over the next 5 years, I worked hard to get to a place where I could function and be happy without guilt. I journaled, blogged, received counseling, and read a lot on the topic of grief. I made progress in finding happiness and meaning in my life. Throughout my journey, I discovered a passion for helping others, and I knew my profession was going to involve those who were also grieving some kind of loss. So I've made it my mission to touch the lives of the bereaved, to walk side by side with those who have experienced loss, to witness the pain of others and hear the stories of those in mourning. That's why I'm here today. Now that you've had an introduction about me, let's move on to what you are here to go over today. The 3 most dangerous myths the grieving believe that keep them broken, in despair, and wondering if they will ever be happy again. We are going to count down the top 3 myths, starting with myth number 3. The myth is that the loss I experienced doesn't deserve to be grieved. People often say, it was only a blank, or I didn't experience grief because it wasn't like someone died, or I didn't know them that well, or so-and-so has it way worse than me. Because of this myth, people make excuses for why they don't deserve to grieve. The reason this myth is so dangerous is that everyone can experience grief and loss. There are many reasons grief can occur because grief is a natural reaction to the loss of something that holds significance in one's life. The dictionary defines grief as keen mental suffering or distress over affliction, loss, sharp sorrow, painful regret. What you will notice is that I did not say grief or loss is pathological. It's not a diagnosable disorder, because it is not. Keep in mind as we move forward that grief is a natural reaction. Remember how we had that little survey at the beginning of the webinar? I asked you how many causes of grief there are. The most common answer was between 11 and 21. Although that is not correct, thank you for participating in the survey. There are a few correct answers, and the correct answer is that there are well over 40 causes of grief, including death of a pet, a person, loss of employment or fertility. It can come about from divorce, retirement, moving, or legal issues. Some experience grief from empty nest, and others when they lose a loved one to addiction or Alzheimer's or dementia, even when those loved ones are still alive. Additionally, when people lose their feeling of safety, trust, control, health, freedom, faith, there's many things that you can, intangibles that you can lose following a sexual assault, health scare, or other traumatic experience, and grief can accompany those. There is no hierarchy of grief. If loss of something significant to you has occurred, grief is a natural response. Let me share a story with you. Following the death of my son, I attended a support group for grieving mothers. I distinctly remember the first session I went to, and we all introduced ourselves. So I introduced myself and my story. There was another woman there who had experienced the death of her son at the age of 18. Then another woman shared who had experienced a stillbirth of her daughter. She had stated that she didn't feel right being a part of the group because her daughter had died prior to birth. I was shocked by this, but she said she didn't feel permitted to grieve when she had not even met her. The woman whose son had passed away at 18 graciously said, "Well, I was given the gift of at least knowing my son, and you didn't get that. Your daughter's whole life was taken away from you, but at least I got 18 years. Your situation seems worse to me." That's when it hit me. Grief is subjective, and there's no chart about who gets to grieve more or less. Although it is common to grieve a physical death, loss in general impacts people, no matter what type of loss, because there are well over 40 causes. This myth is so hurtful. Myth number 3 is so hurtful because it prevents people from accepting the idea that their loss is worth grieving. It doesn't give everyone the equal right to grieve. Now, what I'm about to say can be hard for people to wrap their minds around. When we are in the depths of grief, it's hard to understand that anyone can feel as bad as we do. There are many things that feed into this myth, including our lack of knowledge about what leads to grief, how society talks about the grief process, and our comparative nature. But I can boldly say that if we believe our grief is worse than anyone else's, we are playing into this myth, because we are saying that some people deserve to grieve and others don't. When we create a hierarchy, we will omit some types of grief, minimize others, and exaggerate others. Everyone deserves the right to grieve a loss. It's a natural reaction, and there are well over 40 causes of grief. Until we can all understand that our loss deserves grief, or that we are permitted to grieve if we experience a loss, we cannot get to that point, healing cannot start. This myth will create a barrier to happiness and living a full life. Okay, are you still with me? As we count down, we are going to myth number 2. Are you ready? Type yes in the chat box. All right, yes, yes, yes. Okay, let's get going. The second myth is that grief means sadness and crying. The danger of this myth is that grief and loss can look and feel different for everyone, as it's a unique experience. So when there is an expectation of grief as sadness, with the appropriate responses only being crying, all the other things we experience are minimized. What we know to be true is that grief has signs and symptoms that impact 3 areas of our lives. If you can imagine your world broken into physical, emotional, and mental domains, grief and loss can impact all 3 of them. I'm going to go over each of the 3 now. I've created corresponding infographics, and as part of the thank you for sticking around to the end of the live webinar today, I will send them to you with some other PDF material. Before I continue, I would like to point out that there are no absolutes in grief. There are no reactions so universal that all or even most people will experience them. Some individuals may identify with much of what is covered next, and some may relate to a few things. Others may experience different things not mentioned here, and that's okay. Grief and loss is a unique experience, and there is no right way to feel, emote, or think. If you or someone you know is experiencing some, many, or most of the signs or symptoms I'm about to discuss, and they have experienced some kind of loss in the past, they may be connected to unresolved grief. First, let's look at the physical domain and some common physical signs and symptoms of grief. There are a lot of points included in the next few slides, so as a special thank you for sticking around to the end of this live webinar, this is one of the bonus infographics you will receive. For you note takers, you won't feel so pressured to get everything down. Here are some things people experiencing grief or loss in the physical domain might say. I feel lightheaded or dizzy. I'm exhausted. People, friends, or family tell me my speech sounds slower or faster. They may say something like, I'm drinking more alcohol or misusing drugs. I'm getting sick all the time. I feel restless. My back, neck are sore. Or I'm always hungry, or I don't feel like eating. My throat feels tight and it's hard to swallow. Can you see how some of these signs and symptoms could be attributed to something other than grief? Next, we will go over the emotional signs and symptoms of grief. Again, this is the infographic you can expect in your inbox as a bonus for staying for the entire live webinar. Individuals experiencing emotional signs and symptoms may say such things as, I'm so angry, guilty, bitter. I feel numb or detached, or like my life is over. I feel empty or not like myself. It feels like my heart is being ripped out. I'm on an emotional roller coaster. I feel like shrieking, but afraid I won't stop. I'm broken and vulnerable. I'm crying all the time or can't cry. They still have their blank and I don't. I wish I were them. I'm lonely and just want blank back. For most of the blanks, you can include many of the types of loss listed previously. So examples could be, they still have their job, or they still have their health, they still have their relationship, they still have their safety, they still have their freedom, and I don't. I wish I were them. Society can have a huge impact on the emotional domain. The social reaction we receive in this domain can pressure us into feeling a specific way. When we don't feel that way, when our emotions are different than what is quote unquote expected, it can prevent us from feeling what we need to heal. So we've discussed the physical and emotional domains. Let's go over the mental domain. Here's another PDF to expect. As I read out the sentences, see if any of these fit with you. What did I do to deserve this? Why did this have to happen? I keep thinking about how it happened. I think I'm going crazy. I don't believe it. Blank isn't gone. I can't focus or concentrate. I wish it were me instead of blank. I blame people, situations, things for my loss. My mind is racing. I can't stop thinking about blank. I see blank everywhere and I look for them. I think I've heard quite a few women who have experienced the death of with a miscarriage or a stillbirth, noticing pregnant people all over the place, even though they're not more common. It's just that I think we're more apt to notice them. I remember when my cousin had passed away, I remember thinking that I'd seen him in a whole bunch of places when I knew that that couldn't be the case. Other things that people say is, I wish I said goodbye, apologized, or told blank I love them. I'm forgetful. You may notice that many of the signs and symptoms share similarities with other mental and physical disorders or ailments. There's a significant percentage of people who have signs and symptoms of grief that they mistakenly attribute to something else. So other than their grief or loss. If someone has experienced a loss and a doctor has ruled out other medical reasons as the cause of specific symptoms, it is appropriate to question whether an unresolved loss may be the underlying culprit. I'm sure you would agree that many of the signs and symptoms I discussed here today share similarities with mental health issues. Grief is not a mental illness, but some of what people experience can share commonalities with mental disorders. For those who have mental health issues, following through with a doctor, psychiatrist, or psychologist's treatment plan that you have created together with them is the best possible solution. But don't don't dismiss the idea that working through unresolved grief may bring positive benefits to one's mental health. So, who is ready for the biggest myth the grieving believe that keeps them broken, in despair, and wondering if they will ever be happy again? Here is the biggest myth, myth number 1. And that is that grief has a predictable path, intensity, and duration. Society has a way of convincing us that grief and loss should be done in a certain way. We are taught that grief is a straight line from the loss to the healing, that the intensity is highest at the beginning and weans off at the end. And depending on the type of loss, it will be for a specific amount of time, although no definitive time frame is ever given, but rather it is arbitrary. We see and hear evidence for this. For some, they are shamed for grieving too quickly, such as when somebody says, "Her husband died 9 months ago. Can you believe she's over it and already has another boyfriend?" Sometimes it's perceived to be taking too long. "His dog died and he's still carrying on. It's been a month. Move on. Just get another dog." I'm sure you could understand how hurtful both of those statements would be. And we do this with all types of loss, including those intangibles. I'm going to give you a personal example. You will see how it fits into a few of the myths that we've talked about here today. There was a time when I was telling someone about the death of my son, about a few weeks after he had passed away. And the woman said to me that she was surprised I wasn't crying. That's myth number 2 there. And she said if she were in my shoes, she wouldn't be as calm as I was. And that's partly myth number 1 here. That shredded me inside. Whether she meant it or not, I felt like I was a bad mother because I wasn't sad enough over the death of my son, or that I was not crying so soon after his passing. I was sad. In fact, I had spent the entire morning crying on the floor so hard that I literally dehydrated myself to a point where not a single tear could be shed. Even when I wanted to cry, I couldn't and had a major headache. So myth number 3. That moment taught me that I was expected to behave in a certain way. The danger of myth number 1 is that it's just not true, and when things happen naturally, they are more unpredictable, and people then are feeling crazy or pathological. Remember what I said way back at the beginning. Grief is not pathological. It's not a mental illness. It is, however, a process. We can feel shame and guilt, and ultimately we can get stuck on this path because it looks different to everyone, and we think we aren't doing it correctly. When we don't work through the process organically, when we try to be prescriptive in grieving a certain way, we won't carry out what we need to do to find healing. In reality, grief can be intense and short. It can be less intense than we anticipated, but last a really long time. Intensity can fluctuate, and when you think you're okay, you might realize you're most definitely not. The path to healing can be circuitous. It can take us in unexpected directions. Healing is not always a forward motion, as sometimes it is halted or it moves in a direction we don't anticipate. This isn't regression or failure. It's just the past path we traverse to heal. It's hard to meet whatever norm there is out there because it's subjective. As a result, I think this myth impacts grievers' ability to navigate their way from sadness, hurt, anger, any of the emotions, mental, physical reactions we have. It impedes that navigation from those towards healing because people are not permitted socially to grieve in the way they need to or for the duration they desire. When we live believing this myth, we assume the goal should be to experience loss, grieve, mourn, heal, and move on. So if at any point we experience extreme sorrow or find ourselves mourning or grieving the loss, it's as though we're some kind of failure. However, what I learned is that the goal is not to avoid negative emotions or thoughts in regards to my grief, but to learn to live with my loss in a way where the loss did not impede my ability to live a happy and fulfilling life. Myth number 1 tells us that we must complete the grieving, mourning process to live our best life. But what is more realistic and appropriate is to understand that we can live that life while grieving. There is not a step-by-step checklist that can teach us how to end grieving, but we can learn to live with loss. Let's quickly recap what we have learned here today. And we're going to start with myth number 3. And that myth states that the loss we experience isn't deserving of grief. This is dangerous because people won't start the grieving process if they don't believe their loss is worth grieving. We now know that there are over 40 causes of grief, and they are all worthy of the grieving process. Counting down to myth number 2, which is that grief means sadness and crying. Although sadness and crying are appropriate reactions to grief, it's dangerous to think that grief is only those 2 things. We learned that grief impacts 3 domains, which are our physical, emotional, and mental worlds. The biggest myth is myth number 1, which is that grief is a predictable in path, intensity, and duration. This is dangerous because constraints are placed on the grieving that can make people feel like they're not doing it right or as though something is wrong. It also convinces us that life must be halted until we've completed our grieving and that it needs to be done in a specific way. What is actually more beneficial is learning to live with loss and find a new way of being while grieving. The thing is, even though we've spent the last while here today discussing grief, we haven't even scratched the surface of grief and loss. I've given you the 3 biggest myths, but what you may be left wondering is, how do I learn to live with loss? For that reason, coupled with my passion to help those who are ready, I have created a 6-week webinar series called Living with Loss that elaborates on what we've discussed today. It's a program that assists people in rediscovering their happiness. How can you tell if living with loss could be of benefit? Ask yourself, have you altered your life choices after an unresolved loss or losses? Are you using unhealthy coping mechanisms to protect yourself from further heartbreak? And this can be alcohol, drugs, food, gambling. Are you living a guarded life, or are you hesitant to fully participate in relationships or new opportunities? If you answered yes to any of those questions, or you work with people who would, I'm inviting you to continue with me for a 6-week webinar series to take steps in moving from a place of brokenness to a place of healing, to transition from a place of despair to a place of hope. Living with Loss was designed to create a community for those who are somewhere in the grief and loss process. It is interactive, informative, empathetic, safe, non-judgmental, and non-prescriptive. Living with Loss was created in an online seminar format where all grievers are welcome because everyone who has experienced a loss of any kind shares in the hurt. So what can you expect from the Living with Loss series? There are 6 modules presented online in a live webinar format, much like the one that you're watching now, with the recordings available for anyone who is unable to attend live. Module 1 is the introduction. In the first module, we spend time talking and creating a safe community. We discuss the stages of grief, not because we need them to go through them in a prescriptive way, but because it highlights how different each person's experience with loss is. And it also touches on the other commonalities grievers share. We discuss the difference between grief and mourning. Even though we use those terms interchangeably, they are different. And we also explore the benefits of empathy. Module 2 is the problem with loss. During this time, we talk about misconceptions of grief and loss and the negative impacts they have on our grieving. An example of this is the idea that we need to go backward to go forward, or that we need to recount our loss in great detail. This module will include a discussion on the dreaded platitudes, such as what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It is here where we sort out how misconceptions and platitudes have impacted us. In the third module of the series, we dive deeper and discuss our relationship with loss. We talk about growing comfortable with pain and the reasons why it can be hard to move toward happiness. Also, it is here where we delve into individual grief in a growing public and social world. Module 4 is what I call the world of why. This is a common sticking point for people in their walk with grief. Many questions are asked at this point, such as how and why things in our lives happen and why we struggle to make headway in the healing process. Some people are really sure that they will move on once they get the answers to these questions. And we discuss that in detail. Next is the 5th module, and it's all about ceremony. We discuss formal ceremonies such as funerals, celebrations of life, etc., and informal or non-traditional ceremonies. We will discuss the importance of ceremony and how it can be appropriate for healing of all kinds of loss, including intangible losses. Additionally, we will touch upon the idea of closure and whether this is even a thing. In the final module, we honor and remember that which is lost. And I think that's probably my favorite module. It is here where we venture to create purpose and journey to our rediscovered happiness. Within this week, we talk about loss anniversaries and surviving holidays and special occasions, or even just the places in which we may have lost our specific things. And these aren't just one-sided presentations. Within each module, there will be an open dialogue, an opportunity for questions and answers. Every week, you will receive an email from me summarizing the previous module, a link to the recording, all accompanying resources, and notes to prepare you for the following week's module. The resources will come in the form of infographics, PDFs, and scripts. There are exercises and specific skills taught to help gain awareness and perspective, techniques to assist with the physical, mental, and emotional reactions to loss, and action steps or quote-unquote homework to create and facilitate community. Recovering from a significant emotional loss is not an easy task. Taking action that leads to healing requires attention, open-mindedness, willingness, and courage. It also takes a community. It's for that reason I supply 3 months of access to a closed Facebook group for anyone who joins the Living with Loss webinar series. Not only will you have the opportunity to ask me questions, but you will be able to share with others within the group your concerns, comments, and progress, while providing and receiving support, encouragement, and empathy. It is a safe community of like-minded individuals where we can facilitate healing free of judgment. I have 3 pricing options to ensure high-quality content is provided with various levels of support. Option 1 is recorded webinars only. So following the day of the live webinar, you will be sent a link to the recording so you can watch it on replay. Option 2 is the full Living with Loss series. This gives you access to the live webinar series, plus you'll get a weekly email with a link to the recording, attached resources, and preparation notes for the next week's module. In addition, you become a member of the 3-month closed Facebook group. That leaves us with option 3, which is the Living with Loss series, plus individual access, so that's the reserved access. There will be some of you who are willing to dive right in and are looking for a more in-depth individual counseling experience. So I'm reserving only 10 spots in the Living with Loss group for those who want a one-to-one personalized counseling experience for 1 hour per week. You can choose either phone or online options, and those who are in the Kamloops, BC area, you have the added option of a face-to-face meeting. In my regular practice, group counseling rates are $80 per person per week or per module, giving this series and option 1, which is the recorded webinars, only a value of $480 plus tax. Option 2 then, the full Living with Loss series, Gives you the access to the live webinars. Remember, that's $480 value. Plus, it gives you weekly emails, which is valued at $150 plus tax. And in addition, you become a member of the 3-month closed Facebook group, valued at $30 plus tax, giving the total of all 6 modules, the closed group access, and the weekly email package at $673, including tax. Option number 3, which has the most one-to-one contact with me, and there are only 10 reserved spots available. They get all that's included in the Living with Loss group, valued at $673. I see I have a typo there. It's actually not $675, it's $673. Plus 6 individualized accompaniment counseling sessions, valued at $803, with a total value of $1,476, taxes included. The course starts on November 8th, 2017, and I'm going to have the registration open until that date. But for anyone that registers prior to midnight on October 29th, they will be able to get a limited time offer. So remember that the regular price for option 1 was $480 plus tax. But if you're registering by October 29th, the investment price for option 1, the recorded webinars, is only $267, taxes included. For the next week, I will be offering the full Living with Loss group webinar series, valued at $673, for only $337, including tax, which is a 50% savings. And option 3, with the reserved access valued at $1,476, is available for only $819, taxes included. That's nearly 45% savings. Those 10 spots are on a first come, first served basis, and the discounted individual counseling sessions are only available to those in the full Living with Loss group webinar series. And that means that those who are not enrolled at minimum in option 2 cannot gain access to price reduced counseling sessions. To sweeten the deal, I'm offering a bonus to anyone that registers for any of the options before the end of the webinar, and this is called a fast action bonus. Again, this is only available to those on the live webinar series or live webinar platform, and the fast action bonus will only be given out if you register prior to the end of this webinar. It's a steal of a deal, as it is a free 30-minute consultation with me on any of the modules that of your choosing. So if that means that you want to sit with me for 30 minutes and go over something in the ceremony, or go over something in rediscovering your happiness, or any of the modules, you get a free 30-minute session with me to delve into the topic deeper, or to ask me questions, or even to bounce some ideas off of me, or maybe discuss a simple and a more top layer kind of counseling session with me. So you can only get that if you register prior to the live webinar ending. Not everyone is ready to move toward healing, and that's okay. Living with Loss will be offered again in March of 2018 for anyone who wants to wait. But I do want to say that I cannot promise the same price points at that time. For those of you wanting to take the step toward wellness and healing right now, you will get an amazing 6-week course plus the stunning fast action bonus. To register, for those of you who are on the live webinar platform, please click on the Book Now button at the top of the page. You should notice it pop up soon. If you are not watching this live, but you're watching it on the replay, you can go to my website. The website will be pinned to the top of the page here. You will be taken to my website if you do hit on the Book Now button. And while there, select Group Services and then book into one of the options available. There you can pay through PayPal, which takes all major credit cards. If you prefer to register with an email money transfer, that can be arranged, but obviously I do need an email to ensure that that's occurring, and that's why I've listed my email there. I have also included some payment plans for those who require them. As soon as I receive confirmation of your booking, which happens very fast, I can send out the fast action bonus. If you're ready to rediscover your happiness, if you're ready to honor what you are grieving, if you are ready to learn how to live with loss, then I invite you to join me and make positive changes in your life. I cannot promise you it will be easy because it will take work, but I can promise I will support you on this journey to healing. I encourage you to enroll in the Living with Loss series today, as discounted rates only apply for a short time, and the fast action bonus only lasts for the remainder of the webinar. Because registration can take a moment, I will keep that in mind when honoring the fast action bonus. I do want to thank everyone who joined me for the live webinar and has stayed until the end of my presentation. Before we take some time for questions, I would like to get everyone their infographics as promised, and the PDF is my thank you to you. So I'm just going to I'm just going to copy and paste those who are still here at this time and make a note to send out make out a note to send out your infographics to you that are still on the presentation. Okay, are there any questions out there? Comments? Remember, if one person thinks it, usually there are others who are doing the same. Questions can be about the information we learned on the impact of grief, or it can relate to the Living with Loss 6-week seminar series. Okay, I can see somebody is typing there, so I'm just going to wait for that to come through. Again, if you're watching this on replay, feel free to email me, contact me on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Wellness Stride. I also have a website, stridewellness.org, that you can go on my forum or find my contact information on there as well. Okay, yes. So the first question that's been asked, and thanks for asking, the first question is this only for people who have just experienced the death of something or someone, or is that who's going to be basically the largest number of participants? And it's hard to say. Typically, there is a larger portion of people who have experienced some kind of death, whether it's a person or a pet. However, that being said, there are often people who have experienced divorce, sexual assault, or a loss of a job. So if you are not somebody who's experienced a death, other people will be in the same boat as you. So don't feel like that is going to impact you. None of the modules that I offer are only about just death of a person. Even the one on ceremony is actually super important for people who have experienced a loss of those intangible things. So don't feel like you wouldn't fit in if you were there. Okay, another question that I have here is, what happens if I only want to do the recorded option, which is option 1 for those of you, but I want to have access to the Facebook group? Can I pay for that separately? No, actually you can't. And the reason being is I put together things in a bundle. There will be discussion in the Facebook group in regards to some of the scripts and resources that I send out in the email package. So it's just not really fair if I allow some people in who have not purchased that portion of it, because then they would become privy to the things that would be sent out in those emails. So it's one of the packages or the other. So yeah, sorry, no, you cannot. But I would like to say that it is just it's not a huge jump in price point between option 1 and option 2. So if the Facebook group is something that you are interested in, I would encourage you to select option 2, because I think that the weekly emails will be super helpful. Okay, another question. Awesome, thank you. That is a great question. So the question that came in, and they're all great questions, but this is one that I always hope that comes up, and that has to do with the safety and privacy of the webinars and the group, Facebook group. So I am a certified counselor, and that means that I have a set of ethics that I am required to abide by, which means that privacy and safety are of the utmost importance to me. So if you have any concerns, I can promise you that I will do my very best to ensure the anonymity of the information that's discussed, which means that we don't talk about stuff outside of the group. And that's why the introduction module is so important in creating a community of safety. I am not by rule allowed, like legally, to share information that I receive with other people unless there's a break in confidentiality, only for, if somebody's safety is in danger, including yours or somebody else's, or the child's safety is in danger, or whether I'm subpoenaed. Those are really the only reasons that I can break confidentiality. So confidentiality remains really, really high. And we also ask everybody who participates in a group to keep what's in the group. And so those are things that we're going to go over in Module 1. And we do work really, really hard to create a safe space for everybody. So I appreciate that question. Okay, I have time for one more question, because I just want to make sure that we're keeping, being mindful of everybody's time. Yes. Okay. So the question is, what if I buy option 1 or option 2? Am I able to upgrade? And yes, you can. If you get in and you decide, hey, I got option 1 and I've decided I want 2, or I've got 2 and I want 3, can I upgrade? Absolutely. And how that can work is that I just take the total of the higher option and reduce it by the amount that you paid. And then that way you can get everything. So if you were in option 1 and then you wanted to be in option 2, I would send you all of the PDFs and resources that you had missed and then add you to the Facebook group. If you were in option 1 or 2 and then you wanted to go to option 3, it's the same thing, keeping in mind that there's only 10 spots available. So as long as those 10 spots have not been filled, you'd be able to enter them. And then you would just be able to have your full 6 1-hour sessions. And that might mean that you could either use them, double up within a week, or you could carry them over to after the series is completed. Also like to note that the way that the counseling session works is like all counseling, you drive the ship. So if, we get into the one-to-one counseling session and you don't want to talk about grief or loss, that's okay too. It's whatever you feel like you need to use. A lot of people would choose to talk about grief and loss because that's what it is that they're going over at that time. But if something else comes up and you want to talk about it at that time, you're able to do that. So for any of you who, counseling sessions go from pretty much $100 to $250. So to be able to get them at that discounted rate, to be able to talk about whatever it is that you want to go through at that time, you could see how that is an amazing deal, because you're also getting the Living with Loss webinar full access series. Okay, so looks like that's all we have for today. I have made a note of who has been in attendance at the end, so you can expect your PDF infographics in your email box, and the fast action bonus will be ending here shortly. Thank you for joining today. I look forward to diving deeper into this topic with you. If you have anyone you think would benefit from this webinar, please share it with them. There are still live webinars available for attendance, and a recording will be available later this week. Again, thank you. I'm going to be signing off. Until the next time we speak, take care and be well.